Hello, everyone. I'm John Evans, and welcome to another episode of One-on-One. Daniel Peddle has lived away from North Carolina in New York City now for more than 25 years, but this state and this area still mean an awful lot to the 48-year-old artist. He has screened several of his films at the Cucalores Film Festival here in Wilmington, and it was during the 2015 festival that Daniel discovered Mitchell Slaggert and actually helped launch Mitch's modeling and now acting careers. But when Daniel Peddle has needed some inspiration, and when he needed a backdrop for his most recent film called Moss, he has turned to one of his favorite places in the world, Carolina Beach. Daniel Peddle, welcome to One-on-One with John Evans, my podcast. Good to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You are no stranger to Carolina Beach. I was in Carolina Beach this past weekend, and the Carolina Beach that I know, we really didn't see much in Moss. You kind of took advantage of the nature of Carolina Beach, didn't you? Tell us about where you shot on Pleasure Island, that movie.
Well, we sort of hit all the most glorious parts of the island, in my opinion. We shot, of course, on the Cape Fear River. We tried to get some of the most famous areas from Sugarloaf. We shot down underneath sort of where sea breeze starts to form. We shot, of course, up at the Hermit's Bunker and all around Fort Fisher. And we just, covered all the amazing terrain down there because it's actually pretty varied for such a small island. And we really wanted to capture all of that in the film.
You had visited Carolina Beach for many years, but what on the island gave you the idea and kind of the backdrop for that whole movie?
The film came to me from the title, really, Moss. I'm just struck with how that island is dripping with it. It's hanging from the trees. It's in the roots. It's literally everywhere. And I know it's a kind of not a totally common Southern name, but it is a name that you hear once in a while down there. So I just decided, I want to make a character named after this incredible moss down there and sort of reflective of all the characteristics that you associate with moss. So the seed of the film really came from the title itself, and just I'm a nature-loving guy. I grew up on a dirt road down in North Carolina outside of Winston-Salem and spent a lot of time in the woods myself. And I've been going to Carolina Beach my entire life. So, I really wanted to show the beautiful natural preserves that are there. And we did capture some of the community as well, but we definitely, edited out all the McDonald's and the Marriotts and...
What are some of your earliest memories of Carolina Beach? I guess you said your folks have a cottage there, and you've been visiting it ever since you were a child. What are some of your earliest memories of going down there? Maybe some of your fondest memories, not necessarily as a director or an artist, but as a young Daniel Peddle.
Well, back when I was eating donuts, going down to Britt's Donuts, of course, that's an amazing thing. I remember the first trip I ever got to go on to, the far end and see the Hermit's Bunker. That really made a huge impression on me as a child. And I remember, the boardwalk before it. It's been beautifully renovated, but, there for a while it was sort of trapped in time. It was almost like you were stepping back into the 1950s. And I remember, the boardwalk. And honestly, I remember how it used to be kind of a little sketchy. I mean, it seemed to be the place where, the local drunks made home. And I enjoyed all that. I mean, I really enjoyed this sort of blue collar vibe that the island certainly had then and still maintains to some degree now.
You said I read several articles that that people have interviewed you for Moss and your history in North Carolina, and you said in one of them that Southern culture is often portrayed in a negative light, and you wanted to kind of correct that? Maybe not the right way, but at least show that it's not always that way. Maybe that's a better way to describe it.
Yeah, I think it's really easy to demonize people who live in the backwoods, and there's a lot of very negative portrayals of those types of people. And, having grown up around those folks myself, I know that that's really not what they're like. These are people that are connected to nature, not just because they love it, but out of necessity to some degree. There are plenty of people that still hunt for their food and rely on the Cape Fear River, for instance, for their sustenance. And when you're connected to nature, you're by default, an evolved person, in my opinion. And I really wanted to show that in the film, and to show the kind of humanity that you experience with people who live in isolated areas, not necessarily just the South, but, places that are sort of cut off from the digital era, if you want to call it that, of modern life. I've spent a lot of time in the Appalachian Mountains. I made a documentary film there about the trail angels that help the thru hikers through that place. And, once again, that was a film where I was, pleasantly surprised to be able to show that there were all these very kind-hearted people that were in these extremely isolated small hamlets that the trail passed through, and they went out of their way to help these perfect strangers that they would never see again, coming through. And these were people with very little means. They were saving up their money to spend on strangers. So, in that film and this film and in Moss, I just wanted to show that, because I think we're living in an era now where, the media and maybe the political, world, they really want to divide us, and, this whole blue state, red state idea. And I just don't think it's that simplistic. And I think that on both sides of the aisles, we really have to make an effort to focus on the things that unite us. And that was part of my goal with Moss, was to show these people that you normally would maybe, chalk up as hillbillies or hicks, and, these negative ways of seeing them, to show that they are dealing with the same stuff that we all deal with, life, love, loss. These things are common denominators in every human's existence. And those are the things I wanted to focus on.
Talk to me about the process. Once you decided to shoot in Carolina Beach, how did it all unfold? Was it difficult to get crews down into those areas? Was it easier than you thought it was going to be, putting it all together? Did you have to wait for the right time of day? Because it looked to me, again, as I saw the trailer and a lot of the other video pieces, that you really captured the nature of that island in nature's time, not in special effects, not in lighting. It looked to me like you really used the sun, the moon, and the entire area of Carolina Beach to highlight itself almost. You know what I really mean by that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, to start with the beginning of your question, the idea was to do a simple fable, really. That's what I wanted to do, to strip it down to a kind of essential story. And if the film is really a retelling of Little Red Riding Hood in a lot of ways. So we started with this sort of simple framework, and because we were working with limited resources, you automatically have to accommodate the narrative accordingly, and that meant that we would be limited in how many interior locations we can maybe lock down. So I went into writing the script knowing that I wanted to work with a skeleton crew and work with local people on the film, cast them, if not as themselves, as other characters in the film. And so I designed the script to best enable us to do those things. And one of the reasons why I wanted to shoot on Carolina Beach, was that we would have this varied terrain at our disposal. And once we got permission from the amazing folks over at the Carolina Beach State Park, they really opened that up to us to let us do pretty much what we wanted to. And therefore, we were able to show, a really amazing variety of cinematic landscapes in the film that didn't require an enormous amount of money. And a lot of people comment that, the film looks like we had $1 million budget. And that's because we really worked to capture the inherent beauty of the place. We used, as you said, natural light. And we worked with Mother Nature. And that's a risky move to take, especially when you're shooting on the river and there's a lot of choreography that's involved to get those kind of simplistic, sublime-looking shots. It really belies the confusion and chaos that was going on behind the scenes. And, we encountered everything that Mother Nature has to throw your way. We got hit with, but the script was designed to set us up in a way that we could pretty much coast with those kind of things, and that's what we did ultimately.
I imagine, though, that when there had to have been a couple of times during that whole process when you just went, man, what are we doing here? What are we doing traipsing through the mud? What are we doing traipsing through snakes and everything else? Do you remember any stories from that whole process that you went, what am I doing here?
Yeah, there wasn't a day that went by that I didn't have that feeling. We shot for 23 days, and then we did 2 days of pickup. So we did 25 days total. And, there was one moment where Mitchell, the star of the film, he was really being, he grew up thinking he would go into the military. And when he came onto this project, he approached it very similar to the way I would imagine a soldier would. I would ask him to do whatever, and he would go and do it. And one of the things was, can you take that canoe out into that swamp, go way out there with it, turn it around, spin it this way, and I was giving him all these kinds of directions that a normal actor would have scoffed at. And because he had this yes sir can do mentality, he would just go out there and do whatever we said. And at one moment he was out there finessing the canoe before he got in it, and we saw a water moccasin come up out of the water. I mean, its head was as big as a grown man's fist, and it was coming right for him, and he just slowly backed up, and moved out of harm's way. And, again, Mitchell, he also grew up in the woods, so he knew how to handle these kind of environments that a lot of people would not have known how to do. So, that was just one example. But even there's an amazing scene where the owl in the film, Moss has a pet owl, and we only had 2 shots to film the owl off its tether. And this is an owl that's being it's in a kind of a preserve, and it's sort of a I would say an ambassador for those kind of birds. So it wasn't a wild owl, but it had to come off its tether, and there was a moment where it literally flew over the camera in this incredible way that we could have never even storyboarded something this perfect. So I think Mother Nature smiled on us a lot of times when she wasn't, spitting at us.
Yeah, because I've spent many a day down on Carolina Beach, and it can be beautiful one time, and then 10 minutes later it could be just raining cats and dogs on you. You worked not only with Mitch, who was brand new to the whole process, but you worked, from what I understand, with non-actors, store clerks and others who, like you're saying, not pretentious, that's beneath me. Did that assist in making this really what you wanted?
Yeah, I mean, I come from a documentary background. I studied anthropology at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and then I went to graduate school in film in New York at NYU. And my first film was a feature-length documentary, as was my second film. So I really use a lot of those techniques in my narrative filmmaking. And just to further explain, actually Mitchell had never acted before. This was the first script he had ever held. Mm-hmm. And everyone in the film, with the exception of Christine Marzano, who is a working actress, everyone else in the film had never ever performed on camera before. So I have a certain style of working with people to kind of get what I know I need. And, it's Buddy, who works at the bait and tackle shop right off the bridge over there on the right. a lot of directors would come in and see a place like that, and then, the next goal would be to go out and cast someone who could be Buddy, a professional actor who can learn these lines and hit their marks. And, as soon as I met Buddy, I'm like, well, who's going to play Buddy better than Buddy?
Right.
So what then the goal becomes is to kind of squeeze this performance, if you will, out of people that aren't used to giving in that way. And luckily for me, as Buddy's wife told me later, she had always thought he'd be in pictures one day. So he was strangely well prepared for his role as himself. I'm not going to say he was a ham, but he definitely has a charming way around himself that we, captured in the film.
And I understand he's got 4 names, one of those something, 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 the fourth. And you met him later and asked him for credits, and he just prattled on to you?
Yeah, that's right. We just credited him as Buddy on the IMDb page, and when I went to visit him, I didn't even know he knew what IMDb was, the International Movie Database, and he had said, I'm on IMDb as just Buddy. I'd love to have my full name on there, and I was like, oh man, okay, sure. So he gave me his name, and it's one of these 4 names, and he's a junior. No, he was a senior. No, I don't know. He's like a 4th generation of whatever he is.
That was
I can't remember it exactly now, but I think it's Irby Dalmas. That's his real name.
Yeah, I read that. I had to chuckle because I can just imagine. What did Cucaloris do in this whole process? To me, from my vantage point, A, you were at Cucaloris when you discovered Mitchell, but B, you also showed this movie at Cucaloris, and you've shown others. So not only are you really have like a history in Carolina Beach, Cucaloris and Wilmington really has played a part in your background too.
Absolutely. Cucaloris is an incredible festival. I mean, I've made 5 feature films, and I've done the circuit of festivals all around the world. And honestly, I would say Cucaloris is definitely in my top 10, if not top 5. It's an amazing festival, and largely because of their programming and also just the good old Southern hospitality that they, share willingly with all the directors. And they've been a big supporter of me as a filmmaker, and they played my first narrative feature, which was set in an abandoned trailer park in North Carolina called Sunset Edge. And my nephew was one of the stars of that film, and he was going to school at community college at Cape Fear, and we were there showing that film, Sunset Edge. So he was with me, and he was taking me on a little tour of the campus on our way to a screening of the film. And that's when I met Mitchell, who became the star of Moss, and they had played. Moss was the Southeast premiere at Cucaloris. So it's just an incredible festival, and I've met so many people there that I'm now friends with, and people that I've collaborated with. And Wilmington, hopefully the situation with the film and TV industry is on the rebound. Because, of course, it has an incredible history in Hollywood. It was at one point the 3rd largest film and TV producing state in the Union, and that's something to be really proud of, and it's actually something to be really protective of. And I know we've slid out of that role at the moment, and I'm hoping we can return to that because, it's amazing for the economy, and it's also just an amazing place to make films, North Carolina, Wilmington in particular, where you have access to this incredible coastline and all these, amazing talents that are there there locally.
Well, if you ever make a documentary about news anchors in the woods in Carolina Beach, I would be happy and honored to work with you. So consider that out there. How do you deal, from your vantage point, with the reviews that are both positive and maybe those that say it fell a little bit short? Is that difficult for a filmmaker?
Yeah, I'm an artist. I've been a painter my entire life, and in the film itself, one of the characters is an outsider artist, and Ray, the father of Moss. And I through the years have developed a sort of envy of outsider artists. I mean, and those are people that they do their work sort of in isolation, and to some degree it's sort of pure for that reason. They're not trying to seek an audience. And when you're someone like myself who lives in New York, and I show my paintings in galleries, and of course I make my films to be seen, you're seeking an audience, and that part of the process of getting a film or your work just in general out the door is really so entirely different from what's involved in making the movie. And I think a lot of people, and I would include myself in this, are not necessarily so good at it, So part of that process includes putting your work out there and getting reviewed. And, the way I make the films for myself. I want to like the movie when it's done, and that's the final measure for me. Am I happy with the film? So once I'm able to sign off on that, I know that everyone else is going to have their own opinion, and everyone's is different, and some people are going to like it and some people aren't. Luckily with Moss, we've gotten some really incredible reviews from some of the most important platforms like the New York Times and the Hollywood Reporter, and that's always amazing to read. And when I read the bad reviews that we did get, in some of the smaller blogs, let's say, it's kind of fun in a way too. I like to read what people don't like about the movie. It's fun for me now that I have some distance from it, and you do have to establish that emotional distance from the project. Otherwise, you just are too raw, and every single poke feels like a sword, going through you. So. Sure. It's hard.
It is, and you have to realize that everybody's got an opinion. And, do you still try to learn something, even from those who may say, look, it may have fallen a little short? Do you learn something from that? Or do you say, look, I'm going to continue and go on and make the movies I want to make?
Well, filmmaking is a collaborative effort at every stage of the journey. And so, of course, you develop a kind of awareness and openness to everyone's opinion. So I do listen to what people have to say. I mean, just as an example, Sunset Edge was a non-linear film, and it was very simple in ways, but it also challenged your average audience. And I realized after that film that I probably wouldn't be making a non-linear film again. That's the kind of thing that you do for other filmmakers and people that are in the know, maybe gone to film school. Of course, they can appreciate a nonlinear film, but your average audience member they want to follow a story the way you're taught to follow from beginning to middle to end. So I definitely listen to what people have to say, and I definitely don't want to make movies that are only for those that can appreciate your art house cinema. I want to make movies for everybody, and even people that maybe don't go to the movies and maybe don't even go see blockbuster films. And I think Moss is a movie that can be appreciated on a lot of different levels and by all different types of people. And I really am proud of that.
When or have you been able to just say, whew, okay, Moss is done, Moss is over, now I'm going here? Because I know that I shot this and then put it together and then took it to Cucalores, and now this year it's actually been released. And but have you had the chance and a second or two just to go, oh, okay, now I can move on to Project X, whatever you're doing next?
This film actually was, it was the shortest process I've had. I met Mitchell in November of 2016, and I had the script finished by March of 2017. March of 2016. Anyway, it was a 3-year process. You can see how the dates all blur together, but it actually went really quickly. I met him 6 months later. We were shooting the film, and 1 year later, we were premiering the film at the LA Film Festival in LA. And so it was a pretty truncated experience for me, and because of that, it's kind of concentrated, and everything that went into it, I really haven't even totally packaged all the experiences of even making the film, much less finishing the film and getting the film out the door. So, I mean, I guess maybe after this interview, I'll take a big sigh of relief, if you want to call it that. But as far as other projects, I'm one of these guys that have them going all the time. I sort of, even though I'm not in any way a chef, I always watch those shows where you see people cooking. I'm a little like that. I've got a couple of pots brewing, something, marinating in the fridge. I mean, I've got projects going all the time. And so even though I may take a little breather after one is finished, I'm already fully thrusted into the next one. And I think that's just, that's the life of an artist. You have to embrace that hustle. It never gets easy. And I think, time now, filmmaking, being an artist, people think of it as something cool to do, and that there's some sort of kind of glamour around it. And in fact, it's just the opposite of that. It's a total hellacious experience on a lot of levels, and it's very, very exhausting, very taxing, and you have to put everything of yourself into it, including your spirit. And so it's draining in a way that your average 9-to-5 job it is not. Those are draining too, but in a different way than being an artist. So you have to take times to renew yourself, and that's why I'm very thankful that my family does have this place on Carolina Beach, because for my whole life so far, that has been my place to go and repower and find the creative energy to move on to the momentum of the next project.
Back to our conversation with Daniel Peddle in just a moment. But first, I'd like to ask you a favor. Please subscribe to the One-on-One with John Evans podcast on whatever app that you're listening to. You'll get a notification as soon as the new podcast is released every week. And the more subscribers we have, the more recommendations we'll get from the apps, and we can bring in even more listeners to our weekly podcast. So thank you for doing that. Now, let's get back to our conversation with artist and filmmaker Daniel Peddle. Are you still a Tar Heel? Are you still a Parkland High grad, a Tar Heel at heart? You've been in New York now for 25, 26 years, and I just, do you still tick North Carolina, or are you pretty much a New Yorker these days?
After you've lived in New York for 25 years, you become a New Yorker by default. And that's true of myself. I have a love-hate relationship with this city, and a lot of things I hate about it. I'm able to reconcile with frequent trips to North Carolina. I'll definitely always be a Tar Heel. I'll always be a country boy, at heart. That's just never going to change, because it's so deeply rooted in who I am and how I was raised, and the respect I have for nature. It comes from growing up in nature in North Carolina, and that's something that you realize in a city like New York, it actually is a great source of power and of peace, of peace of mind. And so I would never fully be able to exist in a city like New York. The only way I'm able to is by leaving it, ironically, a lot. So I would be a Tar Heel till the end.
You have accomplished so much in your lifetime, with starting the Secret Gallery, with your shows like Undertow being named the Critics' Pick of New York Magazine, directing documentaries that have gotten wide acclaim. When was maybe the first time that your folks were really, truly proud of Daniel, that you could see in their eyes that something you did really lit up their world?
My family has been involved with almost every single one of my films. My mom and dad location scouted both Sunset Edge and Moss. Jacob, my nephew, he was the star of Sunset Edge, and he was one of the producers of Moss. My other nephew, Harrison, and my niece, Skylar, and my sister's son, Lucas, they all have been really supportive and involved in my making films and just making art. I remember as a child, my mother, she saw my artistic ability, and a lot of people, they might have pushed their kid away from that into something that they perceived as more stable in terms of a future. Being an artist is a huge risk on every level. But my mom and dad, they really supported this in me. And my mother would sit with me at the kitchen table as a little kid and push me to enter these various competitions that she would find in magazines or through the school. And I just can't imagine not having that support. Being an artist is hard enough, but having your family support makes an enormous difference. And I know a lot of artists don't have that. So I really cherish that childhood that I've had and the willingness that they've had to go out on this limb with me and help me make these movies. They're draining physically on a level that, is akin to warfare from what I've been told by the many vets who've worked on my movies. So I know it's a lot to ask of them, and I'm just, so eternally grateful that they have been supportive of me. And I think my mom and dad, they've been proud of me all along. I don't have this story of trying to, prove something to my family. I think they understand that being an artist has a kind of ebb and flow to it. You have your ups, you have your downs, and you have your good times, your bad times, your green times and your dry times, and they understand that. So they've been there with me all along, and I'm really happy for that.
Yeah, but when I first got into TV, and when I first got my first full-time job and signed my first contract, I copied it and sent it to my dad, because I was like, Dad, look, this is what I accomplished. Look, Dad. I mean, you've got to have some of those, though, that when you got that first deal or when you signed that first deal, it's so good as a young man to be able to do that and make your parents proud of you.
Oh, sure. I mean, I want to show them that their efforts were not in vain, and I think I've had over my career a lot of those kind of moments. I think certainly having them in the audience at the LA Film Festival was a major moment for me on a personal level. Having them come to New York City and see my solo shows, it's it's fantastic, and it's and my work in fashion, they've gotten to witness that as well. And I often pinch myself whether I'm backstage at a fancy designer show whose name I can barely pronounce, or if I'm at a festival or doing an interview like this, I think, God, who would have thought that this would have ever been my path? And I definitely consider myself an ambitious person, but I also have given myself over to this idea that I'm really just a vessel, and that I was raised an evangelical Christian, and a lot of those things have really stuck, that God has something that he wants you to do on this earth. And I've kind of given myself over to it willingly at times, and sometimes I maybe fight against it. But, I've said, what, as long as you want me to do it, I'm going to do it, and give me those ideas, and I'm going to take them to the finish line. And, I've yet to have that moment that comes with doing a big budget film, a studio film. And I'm definitely, striving for that. But I also see the bigger picture that I have to be willing to embrace the struggle that goes with this journey all along, and not look over my shoulder and see what other people may be doing, but just stay true to my own route and my own, heart, soul, so to speak.
Do you get as big a kick out of watching somebody like Jennifer Lawrence, who you discovered, go on and do the things she does, and Mitchell Slaggert, who you discovered, become a Calvin Klein model and now get into acting and get good reviews for some of the work that he's doing? Does that give you as much of a charge as finishing a script or doing something that you accomplish, seeing these young people that you've been lucky enough to give starts in this industry?
Yeah, I mean, it's mind blowing, really, and it's for me, it's kind of validation that I am on the right path, and that I am open to the universe and what, the universe has in store for me. And, I never think, that I kind of made these people or anything like that. I feel like I maybe see it before they see it in themselves, perhaps. But I
Mhm.
know, for instance, with Jennifer Lawrence, from the day after she did her very first on camera job, her mother called me up and said, "Hey, Jennifer loved this experience." And, so so she found her own passion. I didn't, discover it for her. She already had that trajectory in her own life. I just happened to be one of the people that, maybe said, "Hey, this I got some of the briars down over there for you. You can get across that creek now." But the path was definitely already there.
And Mitchell, the same way, when you saw him downtown Wilmington that day, walking downtown and kind of turned your head. And then what, you walked another half block before you realized I better go back and talk to him? Is that how it went?
Yes, in fact, I walked a half block away heading to our screening, and it was literally like God tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Yeah, you better go back and get that guy." So I said, "Oh, okay." And yeah, I literally ran back after him. And you have to trust those moments in life. If you don't, they pass you by, and and who knows what would have happened. And so I also, approach this with a huge amount of responsibility and sort of weight on my shoulder. That I'm taking someone like Mitchell, who taking him at least temporarily out of his normal existence and showing him something that he wouldn't have been privy to without me being entree to it for him. So I want to make sure that he's enjoying the process and the experience. And I tell him all the time, "Look, Mitchell, at any moment, if you're not having fun, if this is something that you're having second doubts about, you can step away from this and say to your grandkids, 'Hey, look what I did.' Show them your modeling portfolio, show them Moss, and you can hold it as a moment in time. That way, you don't necessarily have to pursue this for the rest of your life. You can step away from it. So if he chooses to do that, that's his choice, and I want to make sure that he finds the passion that it requires to follow through on this. That it has to be something that is within himself. It's not something I can sustain for him."
I often ask successful people what advice they give to somebody who wants to enter that field, whether in your case it's artistry, whether it's painting, whether it's modeling, whether it's filmmaking. But I think I know what you would say, because I saw something you wrote that said, quote, "You have to be willing to put 10,000 hours in whatever field you pick and not expect to see the results until then." In today's society where people want something in a heartbeat, do you see that being a flaw in the new people coming into the industry? They have to be willing to work on it?
Sure. I mean, it's a kind of obvious problem that I think we are starting to have because of the kind of instant gratification you have from social media, essentially now, that people expect, to announce that they want to be a star and the next day be one, and it just doesn't happen like that. And even when it seems to happen like that in the case of maybe Jennifer Lawrence or someone like, Justin Bieber, it actually isn't. When you start to really look at their careers, you see that, in fact, they were doing this from the get-go. I actually, in a lot of ways, I don't really believe in this idea of success. And I think our culture really pushes this down our throats, and it has so very little to do with how art really happens, and so I kind of fight against that, and even for myself, I often have days where I look at my career and I go, "Hey, why am I not making a $1 million blockbuster or multi-million dollar blockbuster, and so I have to remind myself that it's society that really puts those kind of pressures on you. It's not yourself that does that. So, yeah, I just last night was writing in response to someone who reached out to me and wanted my advice. I just remind people that, it's not something glamorous. It's not something that is like a happy syrup. You take this, you become an artist, and you become self-fulfilled and happy, and you don't have a 9-to-5 job. So of course your life is better than maybe your dad's was. It's just not like that at all. It's much, much, much harder. So I just tell people, I don't want to discourage people from following their creative impulses, of course, but I want them to understand that, you don't have to marginalize your creativity and just think that it can only be, come out as being a musician or an artist or an actor. You can be a creative plumber. You can be a creative physical therapist. There are other ways that you can be creative. If you want to be a real artist, you shouldn't be asking that question, because a real artist is an artist. They don't try to be an artist. There was no point in my life when I wasn't creating art. So when someone says to me they want to be an artist or they want to be a filmmaker, my first thing is, oh, well, let me see what you've done, and I can ask that of a 3-year-old if they say, oh, I want to be an artist. Well, let me see what you've done. And I bet you the real artists amongst those 3-year-olds are going to start showing me their drawings.
What is next for Daniel Peddle? When will we see you in Carolina Beach again? And what's the next deal you're working on? What's the next piece that you're going to bring to the world?
Well, I have a couple things brewing, and I'm not sure which one's going to go first, but definitely the one that I'm putting most of my focus on right now is a film called Zemo. It's inspired by the editor of Moss, who was a Chinese immigrant to this country when he was 15. And he has Tourette's. And so I've written a film that's loosely based on his life about a boy who moves to New York, an orphan who comes to New York City as an illegal immigrant. And his first 5 days in Manhattan, living in Chinatown, he falls in love with a Chinese girl who's been adopted by a wealthy white family. So the film deals with identity and the class barriers, race, all these kinds of things that are happening right now in our society, and especially in New York City. And most of the film is actually in Mandarin. It'll be my first narrative film that I shoot in New York City. And it's a lot of ways similar to Moss because it's mine, but in other ways, it's definitely an evolution. There's a lot more dialogue in the film and more characters, more locations, therefore hopefully a bigger budget. So yeah, that's my next project. It's Zemo.
Daniel, thanks so much for being a part of the podcast this time around. It has been a real joy, and I know Wilmington and southeastern North Carolina mean a lot to you.
Indeed. It's my heart down there, and I hope to make y'all proud.
Well, here's a hint you already have.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you to Daniel Peddle for joining us on this week's podcast. If you'd like to learn more about his most recent film, go to mossthefilm.com. It's available on digital platforms like YouTube and Google Play, and it's also released now on DVD. So you can get it there as well. And if you'd like to know more about Daniel's casting work, go to thesecretgalleryinc.com. Next week, we'll talk to the young man that Daniel Peddle discovered on the streets in downtown Wilmington, walking to class at Cape Fear Community College. We'll have a conversation with model turned actor Mitchell Slaggert.
My first modeling gig was for GQ Germany. It was like an editorial. And it wasn't, it was a bit weird at first because, like, you know, I'm walking around Brooklyn with, like, clothes that, like, you know, grab attention. So, like, everybody's looking at me while I'm getting my photos taken. I'm like, this is just, you know, it's just unsettling a little bit. But then eventually you kind of got over it, just rolled with it. And then the runway thing was, that's the first thing I learned how to do in my life is walk. So here's just walk a little bit faster.
That's a conversation with model turned actor Mitchell Slaggert right here next week on our podcast. Hey, do you know someone who you think would be a good interview for an upcoming episode? Please let me know who it is. Send me an email, jevans@wect.com. I'm John Evans. Thanks so much for joining us for this week's episode of One on One.